drink champagne, some die of thirst. No way of knowing which way it's going. Hope for the best, expect the worst. Hope for the best.
Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, September 20th, 2024. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And our Washington commentary columnist and the director of domestic policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute, Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
On the one hand, we have a lot to talk about today. On the other hand, nothing all that much new in the last 24 hours. But I do want to continue with our awesome sauce reporting on the amazing developments in and around the strike on Hezbollah by Israel. A document has been leaked out of Hezbollah intelligence. According to Dr. Eli David, one of the sources on Twitter that I trust, according to this leaked document, 879 died in pager explosions, out of which 291 senior commanders were of their number, 509 blinded, 1,735 injured in their reproductive organs, out of which 906 were total damage, and 613 permanent function damage. Seth Mandel, I'm not going to make a big point out of this. 613 is the number.
Oh, boy.
Of the permanent function damage. And if you know what I'm referring to, you will know why I am pointing out the number. 613. I understand this is gruesome. I understand that we are celebrating death, destruction, and injury. But these are these are battlefield injuries, because Hezbollah is a terrorist organization on the battlefield against Israel, and as such, this was a victorious battle on the level of Agincourt, in which you do massive damage to the enemy, and almost no damage is done to you. This is what warfare at its most successful and most pointed is supposed to be. Asymmetrical results, resulting in what would appear to be future implications for the readiness and ability of Hezbollah to fight Israel when the fight begins. Now, they fired a lot of rockets last night, which they didn't do in the shock of the first blush of the pager explosions. So there were big barrages last night. So they're not off the battlefield; they're not out of the game. But it's pretty striking. And then I need to add one more important point, which is that I've been warning people to hold on to their hat, not faint, like sit down when you hear this, but because, it's so shocking. But the Wall Street Journal reported last night that American officials are now dealing with the understanding that there is unlikely to be a deal with Hamas before the end of the Biden administration. Now, I know, Matt, you're shocked. Seth, you're disappointed. Abe, you're outraged at this. On Twitter last night, I compared this to the scene in When Harry Met Sally, where we first see Meg Ryan with her best friend, Carrie Fisher, who is having an affair with a married man who is constantly disappointing her. And Carrie Fisher says, he's never going to leave her. And Meg Ryan, for the 5,000th time, says, of course he's not going to leave her. And Carrie Fisher says, you're right. I know you're right. So if they're actually now, this is the Carrie Fisher moment for Blinken and the Biden administration. Hamas is never going to make a deal.
It's also, the Harris campaign is the hardest hit here, because what does this do to her one line about the war?
She'll revert to, well, I grew up in a middle-class home.
Right. Yeah, Sinwar grew up in a middle class home. I don't know if you know
we should
this,
also,
but
there
her
was one other
second mother
development.
ran a small business. Yes.
There's one other development that happened in the United Nations, and it did make me outraged, which was that as Israel was defeating its enemies in Hezbollah in the north and continuing to pressure Hamas in the south and having to fend off the Houthis in the Red Sea and dealing with the Islamization and incitement and plotting that's happening in the West Bank, and then, of course, worrying about the internal threat and the threat from Iran. What does the United Nations decide to do? Well, it wanted to pass a resolution calling for Israel to withdraw from all the occupied territories, which, because the Palestinians wrote the resolution, include territories that Israel hasn't occupied for over a decade, right? And it's frustrating and outrageous because it shows that the campaign to delegitimize Israel through lawfare and through multilateral institutions like the United Nations is unending. And it's outrageous for another reason, which is that the United States, I'm happy to say, voted against this resolution, but the United Kingdom abstained, didn't vote either way. And that is just a stain on the record of this new Labour government in the United Kingdom, after it had gone through so much posturing and internal fighting over de-Corbynizing the anti-Semites within it.
We published an important piece in the September issue of Commentary. Right now, if you go to commentary.org, the issue that is on the homepage is the October issue. But Stephen Pollard of the Jewish Chronicle wrote a piece for us on the meaning of the Keir Starmer massive, gigantic labor victory and what it might portend. And he made an important point here, which is that victory, which was, I don't know what the margin is, 230 seat, something like that, majority for labor. What's important about it is the high water mark. For labor will never be where it was on election night again. Things are going to go back to homeostasis. The parties will come into greater parity. The Tories will rebuild. Labor will make mistakes. It will become a competitive country again electorally. And what this means, as there is this withdrawal back to the center, is that the Islamist elements within the Labor Party are going to become stronger and stronger and stronger and more important in future elections, by-elections, local elections, and things like that. And so the pressure on the government, far from the decorbinization pressure, will be to Corbynize. It seems almost counterintuitive, but the party making itself a plausible giant majority party will now be encouraged by its most cynical elements, as well as its most ideological elements, to start pandering to the anti-Semites and the Corbynites and the voters who supported them back in 2017 when Corbyn took the party over in a sort of public plebiscite. And we are only at the beginning of the move by Great Britain away from Israel and toward effectively, I think, either a position of neutrality between Israel and Hamas and its enemies, or even a position of relative support for Israel's enemies.
And we should, a few months ago, something happened in this regard where the details are a bit in the weeds, but suffice it to say, the sacred parliamentary rules and norms were very briefly suspended or broken in order to allow Labor to avoid a vote on Gaza and weapons to Israel and things like that. And it's in Britain, this was important because it was, their parliamentary rules, as I said, are, considered sort of sacred. It's supposed to be nonpartisan, all that. But but it was a real scandal. But what they did was they had avoided showing everybody that the Labor Party would have essentially voted along with the leftist parties who wanted stronger action against Israel. They made a maneuver so that Labor could stake out a middle ground between the Tories and the left. When what actually was happening was Labor they were about to vote for as far left a move on Israel as you could, and they had to literally suspend the parliamentary norms in order to get there. And then when they fought about it and they argued about it, people said, "Look." Members of Labor said, "Look, I have these guys outside my home." And then they revealed that there have been threats. Hamas had really started to kick up a lot of dirt in British politics because people were getting threats and voting accordingly or avoiding votes because of personal threats.
Now, remember, so Britain has a much larger Muslim population than the United States. It has a much more radicalized Muslim population than the United States. It has a much more complicated Muslim population because they come from different places. A lot of them come from South Asia. A lot of them are not immigrants. They are, native born to London, to England. But this game of directly threatening legislators is coming here as well. We have now seen, I'm sorry, I was going to look it up. I didn't have time. The congressman from suburban Chicago lives in Highland Park, Democratic congressman. His house, there was a rally and riot, not a riot, but there was like a rally and screaming demonstration outside his house in Highland Park, just outside Chicago on Lake Michigan, affluent neighborhood, very Jewish, where, of course, there was a shooting spree, you will remember, on July 4th. Thank you, Brad Schneider. And so, you only need a couple of such incidents where individual politicians are themselves menaced to introduce the notion of personal menace when dealing with controversial issues in the United States as well. This is when people say we may be becoming a banana republic or whatever. This is part of the overall game. And it may be, the danger that we're looking at here is that Great Britain is the canary in the coal mine on this issue.
So I just think it's also important to note that we have another example of how the Biden's concept of escalation management has completely backfired. So you already pointed out this leak to the media that the administration is beginning to recognize that there will be no deal. What they don't say explicitly is there will be no deal because Hamas won't accept any deal. So they're beginning to understand that. But you also had a report yesterday that MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia said, well, I'm not going to recognize Israel until there's a Palestinian state. And this just shows that the administration's approach to the region, which was to kind of downplay the Abraham Accords from the very beginning, to refocus its efforts on appeasing Iran and placating the Palestinians and the United Nations in pursuit of an eventual agreement and normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, is a dead end. It's a cul-de-sac. And the approach of the Abraham Accords, working from the outside in, focusing more on creating an anti-Iran coalition that might eventually not only produce regularization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, but force the Palestinians to actually get serious and recognize that, no, they're not going to wipe Israel off the face of the map. That approach was the Trump administration approach. It was rejected by Biden. And instead, we have the mess that the United States and Israel find themselves in the Middle East.
I also would like to point out that a story is being manufactured as we speak. It started last night about Donald Trump and the Jewish people that is an outrage and deserves to be pointed out and trashed. Now, Seth has written in the past, I've talked about it in the past. Trump's decision to speak to the American Jewish electorate the way that he does, like the way he talks to many people, may be self-defeating and kind of ugly and personal and all of that. And that this is not a way to make friends and influence people. But he attended 2 different sessions on combating anti-Semitism yesterday. Biden and Harris administration officials did not appear at either of these sessions, do not appear themselves to have any such sessions planned in the run-up to the anniversary of October 7th, though I'm sure Doug Emhoff will go somewhere and talk about Kamala's brisket and how wonderful it is.
How she's made him a better Jew.
She's certainly made him a better Jew, probably because he couldn't have been a worse Jew, but we will leave that to one side.
Good brisket can do that. It's limitless. What good brisket can
something to that.
Since I though my sister-in-law, I am told, makes a magnificent brisket by everybody. I don't like brisket, so I totally discard this whole thing. I'm not
getting off course here.
Not at all. I refuse to allow brisket to take the place of the bagels and lox shorthand. It's like we've had 60 years of Jews eat bagels and lox. Now suddenly we all have to eat brisket. I've had enough. I don't eat brisket. I don't like brisket. Okay. Now, my son likes brisket. I don't like brisket. Okay. So Trump says for the umpteenth time, this is very unfair to me. I'm really good for the Jewish people. I'm the best president for Israel. I should be doing better with Jews. Jews who don't vote for me should have their head examined. Jews who vote for Kamala Harris should have their head examined. He said it 75 times. He's never not said it. Suddenly, there are stories everywhere about the outrage of Trump saying this yesterday. Why are there stories about the outrage of Trump saying this yesterday? Because there is polling showing that Trump is making inroads in the Jewish community that no Democrat has made in the Jewish community for 44 years. When Ronald Reagan got, by some accounts, 39% of the Jewish vote, and by other accounts, close to 50%. Because the polling was very inexact. But if you went precinct by precinct in Jewish precincts, like the precinct actually that Chuck Schumer once represented in 1980, it really looked like it was closer to 50-50. Nonetheless, the number's 39. That's the best number that a Jew has registered since the 1920s, really, if anybody really was polling then. And the Siena poll of New York had Trump up 10 over Kamala Harris, 54-44. Suddenly, Trump's an anti-Semite. I saw someone referring to, can't remember who was tweeting out stuff about Trump and the Jewish vote as a capo for saying something nice about Trump and Israel and like saying Jews should vote for me. Now, I'm not going to take sides on whether Jews should vote for Trump. I'm really not. First of all, commentary doesn't take sides. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. If you email me and say, why aren't you talking about whether you're going to vote for Trump or not, I would literally, our magazine would lose our nonprofit status if we endorsed a candidate. I have free speech rights, but I run this institution. It would be a problem. I would be in litigate, whatever. It's so just so you understand why you don't hear that stuff from us simply on a technical level. But I also don't believe in it really. And I don't believe that it's important to do that. However, I'm not going to sit here and not make remarks about how Trump, who has been a great friend of Israel, unquestionably a great friend of Israel, was a great friend of Israel during his tenure as president. Well, not expectedly. No one really knew whether that was going to happen. He was playing footsie with anti-Semites during 2015 and 2016. He, said he wanted a great real estate deal between Israel and the Palestinians, which made my blood run cold and all of that. But that is not what happened. The proof of the pudding was in the eating. Moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He allowed America to participate in the Abraham Accords, which is the most important diplomatic achievement for Israel since its founding, and is a great friend to Israel, and in that sense certainly has earned the vote, if people choose to hand him the vote, of Jews for whom Israel is a central, if not the central, issue. And for Scott Jennings, the former W. Bush administration official, Republican pundit type consultant, went on CNN this morning and said that the anti-Semitism problem in the United States over the last year emanates from the left, and he was trashed and attacked, and that is absolutely unambiguously true. And it is a shanda and a disgrace that people like Casey Hunt and Sarah Longwell and others should question that interpretation. He would like to know what Biden and Harris have to say about the anti-Semites under their aegis. And so would I, and so will America as 9/11, as October 7th starts to come down the pike. So that's the end of my
and I would add to that two things. One, the devil's advocate argument about the polling increase with Jews is that a disproportionate amount of them live in New York, and a disproportionate amount of New York Jews are either Orthodox or Russian, who may tend to lean right politically or be more open to leaning right politically. But at the same time, what you would say back to that is that the trends are the trends. Russians and Orthodox are not the majority of Jews in New York. It's not like they swamp the polls when you poll this. And also, it's actually been harder. It's not that easy to poll the Russians in New York. Also, that's a separate thing. Is that they're more rightward minded, but less ready to pick up the phone for pollsters, less ready to be activists and stuff like that. So I think it probably evens out a bit, but it's also the trend. I mean, when you talk about the Jewish vote, what exactly are we talking about? Now, a lot of people say, well, you're just talking about Jews who vote. But if you're looking at Jews who are voting strongly based on Jewish related concerns, and I'm not saying that disqualifies others from the Jewish vote. I'm just saying if you want to understand the trends of what the Jewish community is concerned about, then Jews who are voting because Jewish concerns are at or near the top of their list, especially in America, is an important way to measure that. And that, by that measure, the list of Jews who are putting Jewish concerns at or near the top is very clearly growing. And that's something that both parties have to deal with. And it's hurting in this cycle. It's hurting the Democrats.
I do want to say we should bring up an example of anti-Semitism from the right, though, that's in the news. And that is Mark Robinson, the Republican gubernatorial candidate in North Carolina, who was the subject of what I can only describe as a nuclear bomb of opposition research yesterday. One made huge story coming from Andrew Kaczynski at CNN, just kind of the guru of opposition reporting, and then a follow-on story by a reporter at Politico. The follow-on story had to deal with Mark Robinson's name being included in the Ashley Madison website for people who are looking for extramarital affairs. But the CNN story had posts that Robinson had contributed, let us say, to pornographic websites where he referred to himself as a black Nazi, had said a favorable thing about Hitler. He had a record of these statements about Jews prior to his rise in North Carolina politics, but these are certainly incredibly outrageous. And now we find ourselves in a situation where the Trump campaign is distancing themselves from Robinson now, after Trump endorsed him and has been supporting him for years, and
gave him a speaking slot at the RNC.
And we could have reverse coattails here, where just Robinson's kryptonite-like effect on the electorate could harm North Carolina Republicans at the state level, at the congressional level, and perhaps even take a point or two off Trump's support there, which in a very close race could doom Trump. I mean, because Trump needs to win North Carolina. And just finally, it occurred to me as I was thinking through this story, which is just nuts. It's also nuts that a guy like this could rise so high. But why is that? Well, I think it has to do with the fact that when your two main criteria for entry into politics is, do you fight the left, and does the left hate you? And are you loyal to Donald Trump? Well, you're going to get politicians like Mark Robinson because he meets both of those criteria.
I just want to say I wrote about him. If people want to go, I wrote about this in March when he was leading the fight for the nomination, or maybe had just won the GOP nomination. But North Carolina GOP nominees' loony ideas about Jews is a post you can go on our website. And it was, it was a warning. It was meant to be a warning, but this sort of stuff. But it's like the joke, the saying about Jews being canary in the coal mines. Like, well, we tried to say something back in March here at Commentary, and like, this guy's trouble. But if you go to that, you can see some of the comments that he made, which I'm not even sure I would read on a podcast. But it's not. This is not a left-wing drive-by media hit job or whatever. If you want to see the statements that he's made in the past that we already knew even before this, they are really quite something.
So look, I mean, in the not that I think that Trump is a figure out of Greek tragedy and that hubris will mark his downfall, but if there are these negative coattails, right? If he is kryptonite, if he drops Trump's poll numbers by 2%, if North Carolina remains razor thin, which is what all the polling is showing now, it's a 1-point race in North Carolina. And if you can stitch together a 271, 269 scenario, or to whatever, 271, 268 scenario, whatever the number is, I'm sorry, 271, 267 scenario, where Trump can win Pennsylvania but lose the election by winning North Carolina, he will have lost the election for himself. Robinson would not be the gubernatorial nominee of North Carolina were it not for Trump. It was all there, just like Herschel Walker's psychosis was all in front of everybody in Georgia in 2022. And Trump wanted Herschel Walker, and Herschel Walker then had split personalities and I don't know what else, and family crises. And by the way, so does Robinson. Like a month ago, before any of this, Robinson, pro-life candidate, hates the left, higher heartbeat bill, blah blah blah, has to come out and say he and his wife had an abortion 30 years ago because it was coming out. So oppo on him, very easy, it appears. Not a hard sell, and hilariously timed, in my view, as a brilliant nuclear strike. Not that I want to discredit or say anything about Andrew Kaczynski of CNN, who is a remarkable reporter, has been. He was like 21 years old when Ben Smith hired him at BuzzFeed. He has been doing this for like 13, 14 years. He is an amazing political player as a journalist. So I don't know where he got it, and I don't want to say that, he's working in tandem or whatever. But this did happen to drop 6 hours or 7 hours before the last moment at which the Republicans could pull a switcheroo and get Robinson out of the race and off the ballot themselves without Robinson quitting. He is now on the ballot. The ballots are about to be printed. His name will be on them, even if he were to be forced to drop out of the race. That is gold. That is gold for the Harris. Obviously, it's gold for the state party in North Carolina, which is going to have a Democratic governor again. But it's
a related issue there is that he was lieutenant governor.
Right.
He wasn't. He didn't just come literally out of left field, and then people started scrambling for oppo. Yes. He was in state office.
Yeah, the Black Nazi is a new. You got to say though, that's a new one on me. You know, I mean, it's like the movie Black Klansman, although he wasn't, it's not that the Klansman knew that the undercover FBI agent was black.
Or that
in Black
fantastic
Klansman.
Chappelle skit about the blind black KKK Grand Dragon.
Yeah.
It's got to be one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Anyway, so
but I mean, in a broader sense, we have stories like this every election cycle now because people who have no business being in electoral politics have rushed the gates. And so a few of them come out, a few of these stories leak every election cycle, or not even during election, or during the year during day-to-day politics. These are all people who would have been weeded out before the process began ages ago, and I don't know if that makes them outliers. I mean, the problem is now, aside from it representing from Robinson representing someone's version of MAGA, it's also a sort of representation of the state of our politics. There's just too much of this type of thing.
Well, can we talk about that? I think this is an
OnlyFans candidates and get groping in public, and there's all sorts of wackiness. Yeah,
I think you can chart. I mean, as we're talking, Abe, I was thinking like putting on my history cap as a historian. Christine's the historian; she's not here today, but as being the crapola political historian that I am on here, and that I am sometimes in commentary. It does strike me that you combine two or three things over the last 18 years and you get this unholy stew of oppo brilliance, mostly on the part of the Democrats. So the first real hit, I mean, there were two. The first real hit on the campaign trail was George Allen running for senator in Virginia, saying something about an Indian American who was the guy following him from the Democratic Party, taping him on camera. And George Allen being aware that this was happening and going, well, there's that guy Macaca over there who's yada, 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 yada. And that was the end of George Allen. So, and that, because that footage could then be repurposed by Macaca, or I don't remember his name, and sort of put out there on YouTube, which had pretty just started. YouTube started in 2005. So it had just started, and there was footage of Allen looking obnoxious and annoying and maybe vaguely racist. And that was the end of George Allen in a complicated state where he should have been able to win the senatorial race. Then we go to 2010.
Kind of a rising star. I mean, he was
like, he'll win, and then he'll be sent, and then he'll be a credible candidate for president, right? There was a stepladder effect for George Allen, and one word in the wrong place with essentially, but weren't iPhones yet, but effectively an iPhone, and he was done. Then we go to 2010, and we have the cases of Richard Murdoch and Todd Aiken and Sharon Angle, right? 3 senatorial candidates from Indiana, Kansas, and Nevada, all of whom had been captured, caught, or what, again, on sort of in ways that could be exploited on the growing social media networks, saying very discomforting things about abortion and rape and things like that could then be retailed against them and cost them.
Right. Angle, of course, wanted to barter chickens for medical care. That was her.
Oh, that was her.
The legitimate rape was
Aiken.
Aiken. Yeah.
And Murdoch.
I think Murdoch said something similar.
Murdoch was legitimate rape, and somebody else was, women.
And in 2010, we also had Christine O'Donnell. I am not a witch, O'Donnell. Right. She beat Mike Castle, and
that seat was a flip. Like Castle was going to win.
He was going to win
almost certainly in 2010 in that environment. Castle was probably going to win.
Candidates matter.
So she was the Tea. These were all Tea Party candidates They were distinguished in 2010 by the fact that they were further to the right on social and cultural issues than the people that they were running against. And it was a perfect storm that, prevented the overwhelming Republican victory in the House in 2010 from being duplicated in the Senate. And so this is now almost a 2-decade pattern that the Republican Party internally loves or is very much attracted to extremists who seem to be extremists for the causes that they love. But, when someone is an extremist, it turns out they're an extremist in all kinds of ways that don't necessarily have entirely to do with the reason you want them to be elected to the Senate. And 2022, the Trump candidates in 2022, Walker and I can't even remember who else.
But the
effect.
thing is, there's a strain of Republicans who love that too. They love the potential for there being something unhinged about the person. That adds a frisson to the candidate.
Well, that's Noah Rothman's point that he used to make on here, is that they love losing. There's a part of the Republican Party that loves losing because it also then creates the conditions under which the culture war is being won by the left, and that the right is permanently in a state of embattlement, must push itself back against the wall, lesser force against greater force, showing how this works, and willing to lose for principle. But is Robinson, you're losing on principle if you go with Mark Robinson, the black Nazi, anti-Semite, abortionist psychotic? I mean, that is not, that's where the rubber starts hitting the road. We're now moving into the end of the first generation of this entire period of Republican electoral extremism.
But they also there's a wish that anyone who has the capacity to say something crazy may have a little Trump in them. And that's not the case.
I mean, they may have a little Trump in them, but
it very much enables the Flight 93 mindset, right? Because how often online have have any of the four of us been called a peacetime consigliere, by the right? Like this is the thing. It's like, well, it's wartime, so you have to go to war with it. If it weren't wartime, then fine, you can like people like Mitt Romney or Mitch Daniels or whatever, people who don't who aren't Nazis on porn sites or whatever. But like, this is war, so you run with the Nazi you have. It's the sort of attitude, and that's the excuse, is that we can't afford to, and so that furthers the Flight 93 stuff, because every election has to be the Flight 93 election in order to justify telling people that Mark Robinson, you have to vote for Mark Robinson.
Well, Matt, put on your Sarah Palin hat for a minute, because Matt wrote a book about Sarah Palin. So you could call that a unity ticket in 2008, which is that there was John McCain, the ultimate peacetime, even though, of course, he was a warmonger and everything, peacetime consigliere in your estimation, needed a Zetz, needed to bring new life to his ticket. Pick Sarah Palin. But the thing about Sarah Palin was that she was a wildly successful young politician in a new mode, winning in this state, coming out of nowhere, working class girl, moves to Alaska, husband's they ride around on snowmobiles. She has 5 kids. She has a kid with Down syndrome. All of that stuff going on, very exciting, all of this, but also seeming to be an able, worthy politician who manages her state's complicated politics quite brilliantly. And she had a choice to make after.
Well, yeah.
Right? Okay.
She had gone against the oil companies. She'd gone against the political establishment. And I think McCain was attracted to her record of independent political action. Right. And that reminded him of himself in a lot of ways. And I wrote a piece for the Times the day after the pick talking about how they were two rogues. That's what he liked about her. And she also had, of course, glamour, and she had a connection to social conservatives on the life issue, which John McCain lacked. So at the time, it seemed like a great choice. Her rollout was spectacular. Then it ran into some trouble that first week when we found out that one of her daughters was pregnant. But it wasn't until 1 month into her ascension as the vice presidential nominee that she got into trouble answering questions from Charlie Gibson and then from Katie Couric during the financial crisis. After the loss in 2008, I guess to your point, there came a time where could she have remained in office and basically set herself up to be among the front runners for 2012? Absolutely. But her personality,
she chose, I think people forget. So you need to say, basically, she quit the governorship
I was
of
just
Alaska.
about to say that. Yes.
Okay,
in the spring of 2009, she quit the governorship of Alaska. She was, there was some lawfare being practiced against her. But there was a certain kind of turbulence in her life, always kind of has been. And I think that also manifested itself. And she was thrown in the spotlight. Her family's thrown in the spotlight in a way that I don't think she was really prepared for. But she quit the governorship, and she became, for the next 2 years, kind of the leader of the Tea Party in a lot of ways, right? Because it was her comment in August of 2009 about Obama's death panels that I think really catalyzed a lot of the resistance to Obamacare. So she was this figure, I think, who kind of was a bridge between the pre-financial crisis politics and Republican Party and the post-financial crisis populism of the Republican Party. And so she does kind of herald some of the things we're seeing. I mean, she's nowhere as bad as Mark Robinson. I mean, it's
no, of course not.
And quantum levels different. But I think interestingly enough, earlier today on our text chain, Abe pointed out that around the same time as Sarah Palin being a figure of controversy and excitement was the Anthony Weiner scandal in New York, right?
That was Seth.
That was Seth.
Oh, that was
give
Seth.
Seth credit.
Okay. Well, Seth, I give you credit because I think that was true too. And if you remember when Anthony Weiner called the press conference to dispute the allegations of him sexting underage girls, who ended up taking the lectern for the first 10 minutes of the press conference? Andrew Breitbart. So it was all there. It was all, and of course, that was also, if you remember, and Seth, I'm sure you do, as you were thinking about this, that was also when Donald Trump released this video that went viral calling Anthony Weiner a pervert. And so something happened in those years right after the financial crisis where our politics took this turn toward just outrageous, populist, celebrity, scandal entertainment. And we're still living in it.
And Anthony Weiner was, by the way, we should say also obviously very connected. The reason that you can do 6 degrees of Anthony Weiner with anything that happens in politics today is because he was sort of marrying into the Clinton world and whatever with Huma Abed. And not that I don't want to drag her name down or whatever, but he was obviously the reason that those messages, found their way onto a computer that got Hillary Clinton in trouble, et cetera, et cetera. This, right in the center of these guys, they sprung, from the right and the left, they crashed the gates and they really ran right to the center.
Right. But let's take Palin. The reason I also brought up Palin is to say there was Palin. So she was a populist, but she was also a governing populist who used the political power of her governorship. Again, in a highly complex state, she came in as a rogue, took over the reins of government in her state, kind of like Jesse Ventura in Minnesota, although not as a famous person, and did inventive things, right? The famous thing, I put the plane on eBay. Their governor had a plane. I sold it on eBay. That kind of thing. Imagine a history in which Sarah Palin did not drop out as governor, stayed as governor, had a good record as governor. I know it's a weird state to run as president from because it's so small and its politics are governed by this gigantic pool of oil money that no other state really has to play with. But she could have been this bridge figure beating Romney, who was running as, I'm a good governor. I was really good. And you know what? I'll be as conservative. I'll be severely conservative if you want me to be. She was severely conservative. She was an inventive governor. She doesn't quit. She doesn't become an outside populist Tea Party leader. She doesn't get Fox News to build a studio in her house and gets paid a couple $1 million a year by Fox to be on Fox. She stays in politics as a conventional political figure who takes in the changes in the party and uses them technically to advance conservative ideas. I know it's a nice
only
fantasy.
It were so. It's nice.
I know, but I'm just saying
her
that
stand-in. What happened was she had a stand-in in the 2012 primary, and that was my friend Michelle Bachmann.
Fair enough.
You know, and Michelle did not get very far.
Right. But I'm just saying you can see where things went off in this other direction around the time. And yes, I think once again, we have not gotten to the place where we understand the distorting effect, not only of Iraq, which I think everybody has taken in, but of the financial crisis and every alteration in recent American political history, including the conversations we're now having about the economy and where the economy is right now. We're still in the overhang from that moment in 2008 when every American household lost 35% of its wealth in 6 weeks. I mean, it's almost unthinkable that happened. It took a decade for people to get back to par. So let's quickly talk about the Oprah Kamala interview, because there was a very interesting moment in the interview. It wasn't an interview, it was a rally. It was really an infomercial. Literally, it looked like one of those Cher infomercials from the late 90s or the 90s when Cher would sit around with people and they would talk about the makeup you could buy from Cher, like those early infomercials. So it's a round, it's a forum in the round, and there are all these screens around, and Kamala is interacting with all kinds of ordinary, just regular Joe Americans, you know, like Julia Roberts and Meryl Streep and Chris Rock and Bryan Cranston. And it was really and Ben Stiller, because, you know, this is really the real America, that middle-class America that she comes from with her second mother who ran the child care center.
Hanging out with Aaron Brockovich.
Exactly. But then finally, after the 15 minutes of the celebrity appearances, Kamala sits down with Oprah, they have a conversation, and then they start taking phone calls from people on the, you know, who were there. And there was this very attractive young couple, and the woman says, we got married, we wanted to buy a house, we moved in with my parents so we could save money to build up a down payment to buy a house. And we did, and we bought the house. And now my brother and sister-in-law are living with us so they can build up money to buy a house. But our mortgage costs are way more than we expected, and so we're struggling. What are you going to do to lower the cost of living for people like me? Now, when you hear this and you look at this couple, you think, you know what, this is actually a pretty great American story. They looked like they were about 30. They bought a house. They'd saved money to get the down payment to buy a house. Now they are paying it forward by having a sibling living with them to do exactly the same thing. When do you think people bought houses in America in the 1970s, 80s, 90s? Like, yeah, maybe they bought them in their early 20s when it really did cost $1,000 to put money down on a house, you know, before everything skyrocketed. But this is a success story. They are having a problem because mortgage rates are too high, because interest rates went up too high. because their mortgages haven't ratcheted down yet the way they should because they had an adjustable rate mortgage. What is she going to do to help them? They asked. And she said, I'm going to deal with price gouging. And you know what? I love our small businesses.
She does.
And, you know, I want to give a $50,000 tax deduction to people who start a small business, because right now that number is $5,000, and no one can start a small business with $5,000. And Oprah goes, yeah, that's a really small business, says Oprah, worth $4 billion. I would wager, I think I've said this before on the podcast, so if I'm repeating, I'm sorry. I would wager that 95% of the small businesses in the United States start with people with $0.
Yeah, they put it on their credit card.
Or like they start an Etsy. I mean, my niece started an invitation design business on Etsy.
Right.
How did she do that? She had a computer. Okay, so she would have had to pay for the computer.
I think you're missing the big headline out of the Oprah interview, John, and that is not only does Kamala Harris have a gun, she is prepared to use it. She said,
ain't no one get into her house. They're going to be
when
shot.
someone goes away into her house, they're going to get shot. And then, kind of charmingly, she goes, "I shouldn't have said that, should I?" My thing with Kamala Harris. It seems like beneath the banality, there's a pretty interesting person there, and yet she is so nervous about saying the wrong thing that she buries herself under these clouds of verbiage and nonsense. And I think it's a real liability for her. I mean, Peggy Noonan has a column out this morning that, restates a lot of the stuff that we've been saying on the podcast and in writing, that she just dodges everything. You never get a straight answer from her. And people notice that. People do notice. They're like, why can't you answer a simple question?
It is a Rorschach test effect, as far as I'm concerned, watching when I watched Kamala this morning from last night. So I'm watching it and I'm like, this can't be, how can this be? It's now been 2 months. She literally says the same, she gives nonsense answers to questions that are actually quite direct. Like, what are you going to do to lower? There is an answer, by the way, to the mortgage question, which is, what is happening now, right now, should make you feel confident about the future. We just heard that the Federal Reserve is cutting interest rates. That should come in to help you. We are going to do X, Y, and Z when we come into office. I don't know what, like not price gouging stuff, but there are things that we can do. We can deregulate. We have some deregulatory policies and all of that should make the circumstances that you're in a year from now much better than they are now. You will be more comfortable. Your sister and brother-in-law will be able to buy their house at a better interest rate or be in a position like that. She can answer the question. She does not want to answer the question. She wants to go back to these talking points. And I hear that and I go, people are just going to go, oh my God, the vapidity is just overpowering. And then I think, well, maybe they're not. Like, maybe the bar is low because the bar is low. She's running against Trump. The bar is low. She just needs to be minimally credible as somebody who seems to be able to back and forth with Oprah to get the support that she needs to just make it over the hump.
There's a lot of vapidity in America, too.
Yeah, so. I know. Right. Oprah, who is not vapid, but Oprah knows how to turn on the vapidity when she has to.
But you know what I was impressed by, meaning struck by, and I only saw clips of this. I didn't see it in its entirety, was there's a certain way to talk nonsense about wellness and be engaging, because a lot of this came around to sort of feelings about it being Americans and why we came here and what it means to be an American. It was all mixed up and the syntax was swirling and everything from her. But I don't know that she did incredibly have a back and forth with Oprah. That's what struck me. I think there's a different type of chops you need to be able to talk the sort of wellness speak and make it sound like something engaging. And she didn't even have that, as far as I was concerned. Even when you put her in this sort of soft, cushiony setting, she is so unsure of herself that she can't get from the beginning to the end of a statement without you scratching your head.
You could really be right. I find it impossible to gauge what you just said, because that talk, I'm so allergic to it that I don't really know what's effective and what's ineffective, or what fits the model or doesn't fit the model. She seemed more comfortable to me last night than she did with Dana Bash, for example, which I understand, because it's like a play. She's just basically, she's acting, she's literally reciting the same lines. So now she's 2 months into the play, she's really relaxing into the dialogue, because she has it all met. She's off book. She can maybe stress different syllables, make it a little more interesting. I don't know. It's very hard for me to tell, but it did strike me that when you look on the debates about this stuff on social media, you see right-wingers saying, I can't believe the word salad. This is cringe. This is the worst I've ever seen. I can't believe what I'm hearing. And then other people, and I don't think because they're just trying to spin it, saying, she looked confident, she looked comfortable, she seemed like she was on top of her message. And I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And but we got to go back to, maybe we can conclude here. It remains anybody's race. And therefore, that's why the Mark Robinson thing is so bizarrely important. Like, tiny little changes in the atmosphere in various places, and this also gets
especially
back
in certain states, right?
But this gets back to the Jewish vote. Why do I think that everybody goes crazy when Trump talks about the Jewish vote this way, the day after or 2 days after the numbers come out that suggest that he is making these inroads? It's not because of New York State. He is not going to win New York State. It is because of Pennsylvania. There are 400,000 Jews in Pennsylvania. If you do the math, if he gets 10% more of the Jewish vote in Pennsylvania than he got last time, or Jews stay home and don't vote for Kamala because of some of the stuff that he pushes about her and Hamas and all of that, that could be 20, 25,000 votes, and that could be the ball game nationally. It's not that much. It takes very little. He won by 44,000. He won by 88,000 votes in 2016. By some measures, Biden won by 44,000 votes across 5 states in 2020. We are talking about microscopic changes in atmosphere that could make all the difference. And that's why we may see issues and things pop up that everyone's going to go, what on earth? Why are we talking about this? Why is he bringing that up? Why is she bringing that up? And you're going to have to go Talmudically into the crosstabs to figure out what the hell is going on, because nobody is making the sale and closing the deal.
Yeah, and also we saw the organizing in the Jewish community that we haven't really seen in the past. Not to slight Jewish, get out the vote efforts or whatever in the past, but there were in the case of in New York when Jamal Bowman was ousted in the primary, there were some pretty startling statistics about how the Jews were 2/3 of the early vote or something like that. In that, that was less than 10% of the district. So, and then again, we saw it in St. Louis. In the St. Louis area, right, for Cori Bush to oust Cori Bush. So there's a possibility that there's an organizing, sort of movement growing, and that it stays in place. And that also, if you only need, as you said, 15,000 votes in a certain area.
Yeah. Now remember, those votes are within a Democratic framework, right? That Jamal Bowman was ousted by George Latimer in a Democratic primary. So there was no question that no one was voting for a Republican and no one was voting for Trump. So the atmosphere is entirely different. However, we are today is the 20th. So we are 17 days away from October 7th. And how Biden and Harris and the Democratic Party handle October 7th could reassure American Jews freaked out by anti-Semitism and worried about things and worried about campuses and all of that, or it could go the other way. And again, microscopic changes in that kind of atmosphere. I'm just now talking within the Jewish community. Forget the Jewish community. Like, there are a whole mess of Americans who don't like this either and don't like the disorder and the decay. And we talked the other day about how Hamasniks seem to be determined to seize October 7th as a day of resistance against Israel, as opposed to it being a day of mourning for the Jewish people, the anniversary of the most horrible massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And so far as I know, there doesn't seem to be any organized effort in the Jewish community, understandably, to mark October 7th, because it is a memorialization day. So you're not going to get 300,000 people to rally at the Capitol. It would be kind of inappropriate, I think. And it's maybe, I don't know. I mean, but clearly this is happening. It was going to happen at the University of Maryland. It's going to happen all over the place.
In the worst time of the year for
right, because
any sort
it's the middle of the
celebratory
holidays.
Organizing, right? The high holidays, right in the middle.
Right. Yeah, it's called Hol HaMoed. Those are the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah begins on the 1st or the 2nd of October, and then Yom Kippur is 10 days later. So people are Jews who these are the few days that actually most American Jews mark, and so it is a particularly horrible.
The 10 days. Yeah. The whole area is known as, the whole time is known as the 10 days of repentance, and so there's a special focus on not on internal, really on
also on your own internal
prayers and all that stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of time spent in those 10 days looking inward.
Well, if you are a person of faith, but even so, the overall message of the time is you are supposed to reflect on your own sins and your own flaws and your own faults and what you need to do to make restitution or make repairs for your failings, and not say, not so. Yeah,
and also for the non-observant, those are overflow synagogue days. Those are days where
those are the days
literally
where they go.
Every synagogue has to put out extra chairs and stuff like that. Everyone's there.
Yeah. So it's a particularly bad time. But again, politically, it is a time of peril it is a much more significant time of peril for the Democrats and for Harris and Biden than I think they realize, or that they have taken note of, because they are so concerned about not poking the dearborn bear, as far as I can tell. Anybody got a recommends?
I don't.
I can. I have another recommendation.
Please. Oh, good.
I've been reading quite a bit, so I'd like to take this opportunity to recommend Joseph Berger's. I don't know if it's a soft or hard. Joseph Berger's biography of Elie Wiesel for the Jewish Lives series. Came out a few months back. I've had it on my night's table, but finally got around to reading it. It's an excellent book tracing the life of Elie Wiesel, drawing from his two memoirs, which I recommended earlier this year, but also interviews with his son Elisha, his widow, Alicia,
parent at my school, so that's
and who's a very interesting person himself.
Yes,
and his widow Marion, and his close circle. Also, it's interesting, as I finished the biography, I learned that one of Elie Wiesel's close friends, the physician and artist Mark Podwall, had died, and so it was sad to hear. The two collaborated on a Haggadah, which is I own, and which is beautiful. And so, if you're interested in Elie Wiesel, the history of the Holocaust, the survivors, and his, remarkable influence on literature and public life, I recommend this biography. It's short. The Jewish Life series is great. They're pithy.
Yeah, pithy. 200
Pithy.
words. 200 pages.
200 pages. You can get through it in a day or two, and you learn a lot.
And I think people will remember that I am an enormous admirer of Joseph Berger's work. His memoir, Displaced Persons, which I've recommended, I think, at least twice on this podcast, was a reporter for the New York Times for 40 or 50 years. Wrote extensively, was the one of the few extremely literate people able to write about Jewish matters and Jewish affairs in the pages of the New York Times without being offensive or snarky or whatever. And one of the best newspaper prose stylists of our time. And his book is beautiful, and I look forward to reading the Elie Wiesel biography as well. So we not only have Berger's Wiesel biography, I do once again recommend Displaced Persons by Joseph Berger. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. We'll be back on Monday. For Matt, Seth, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.